regarding our schedule. Next Wednesday, a week from today, is the Teacher of the Year acknowledgement and celebration. If you have a teacher being honored that day, you will receive information and with instructions what you need to do. We will be having a joint meeting with the House Education Committee at our normal time, 1:30, but it will be in the old Supreme Court room. So please make that adjustment to your schedule. Next Thursday, any questions on that? Yes, Senator Petty.
Madam Chair, I really appreciate you doing that, but we'll get that, won't we, when we get the agenda for the week? Or
You will. I just want to give you a heads up.
Thank you.
Yes, you will be getting all of that, but just wanted to give you a little heads up on that. Also, a heads up on a week from tomorrow, January 30th, we will be having the hearing for the Kansas Board of Regents nominee, Kathy Wolf Moore. For those of you new to the Senate, you will be getting a packet with her information delivered to your office either today or tomorrow, but soon. And I want to reinforce that is highly confidential. Please make sure you secure that. Do not share that information with anyone, and bring that packet back with you next Thursday for the hearing, and then we collect those and dispose of them properly. So also, please look through those packets and bring any questions you might have for the nominee on that Thursday. So any questions about that? Okay. Good. Next, we'll go to request for bill introductions. Do we have any bill introductions today? Seeing none, we'll go to the overview of school finance formula. Again, Mr. Willis, we're working him hard this week. He will be presenting that information.
Good afternoon. Chair Erickson and committee. Once again, for the record, I'm Matthew Willis, Senior Research Analyst with KLRD. And today I will be talking to you about an overview of kind of school finance and generally how we fund K-12 schools. So there are 3 pieces of testimony that you should have received. One that is digital is the KLRD Kansas School Finance System memo. And then 2 others that you do have physical copies of that I'll reference is a school district's revenue flow chart and then a salmon colored sheet that walks through the very fake Oz Public School District and kind of how to calculate their state foundation aid, which is a large portion, but a portion of school resources. So I will go ahead and start off with that salmon sheet. I can go into as little or as much detail on weightings or anything as you want, and I'll kind of pause intermittently in case there are questions, or again, can wait till the end depending on what the chair would like. So, state foundation aid, which is when we talk about the school finance formula sunsetting, it is primarily the state foundation aid portion that is sunsetting at the end of 2027, is where we get all of these calculations for most of the state general fund that is going to schools. And so to begin with, as you'll see, the first thing is to work on calculating the full-time equivalent, or FTE, of students in the district. Recently, last year, the legislature changed that from being either the prior year or the second preceding year, so the year before, enrollment, the greater those two, to this year, it is either current year enrollment, prior year enrollment, or for this year only, the average of your prior year and your second preceding year. So the district will basically figure out what is their largest enrollment on those timeframes, and then they will add to it any of the FTEs from a preschool aged at risk. And that is what is referred to as total adjusted FTE. And so that's kind of that's the basis start. That is, by and large, the amount of students who were in the building or have recently been enrolled in that district. From there, as you will see with all of the step 3s and their little subparts, is calculating the weightings. So the weightings will cover everything from the at-risk weighting, and then the high-density at-risk weighting are identifying the district students who qualify for free lunches, and then creating additional FTEs. And so that's one thing you'll notice with the finance formula is the weightings, they go to the same thing, but the weightings are not kind of adding more money kind of per student on select basis. It is adding more students to the district for funding purposes, and then all of that is multiplied by base state aid. And so rather than trying to take it and say this student gets X dollars and this student gets Y because they have these weightings, the formula just says your district for funding purposes, it might really have 500 FTEs, but for funding, we're going to say you have 1,202 with all of your weightings, and then fund that with kind of the same amount per student. And so you'll see with the weightings is it's just, again, it's calculating those. So the at-risk and the high-density at-risk put weightings onto your free lunch students, and then that money can be expended on at-risk programs. You also have a bilingual weighting, which is for students receiving bilingual programs. That can be calculated either as a head count of students in those programs or an FTE. Again, when looking through the memo, you'll see a lot of these might have multiple ways of calculating them, and then the district is able to take advantage of whichever the largest is or what works best for them. Low enrollment weighting. On here I did low enrollment. You'll see a lot of our districts do. I believe all districts or most all districts are either going to get a low enrollment or a high enrollment weighting of some kind. And that weighting varies based upon what your enrollment is. Transportation weighting is providing state aid for districts for transporting students who live 2.5 miles or more away from their school of attendance. Career and technical education is funding students, FTEs of students enrolled in CTE courses. The special education weighting, as I believe I touched on it yesterday, but is taking the special education state aid that district is receiving, dividing it by base aid, and then putting it in there for purposes, kind of backing into what that weighting would be. The new school facilities that you'll see is, it is still in the formula, but I just confirmed with KSDE that no districts qualify for it anymore. It was based upon bond issues being held before 2015, and then providing a weighting for facilities a couple years after they've opened. That is all, we are all well beyond that. So that weighting is, no districts are eligible. The ancillary school facilities weighting is for districts who have new buildings and are gaining or receiving a rapid increase of enrollment. Currently, that is 4 districts receiving that weighting. And those districts are all in the Kansas City area. It is Blue Valley, Spring Hill, Gardner Edgerton, and Olathe. And then the final of the weightings, as you kind of are creating all of these, is the cost of living weighting, which there are currently 12 districts. Most of them in the Northeast, but it is Piper, Kansas City, Blue Valley, Spring Hill, Gardner Edgerton, DeSoto, Olathe, Goddard, Mays, Lewisburg, Lansing, Lawrence, and Shawnee Mission all receive that. And while that is a weighting, that weighting is funded completely by local property tax. And so essentially it is collected and the district gets a weighting for it, but it is local that is then kind of fed back through. And that weighting, if you look in the memo, is all about calculating for districts that have been deemed to be in a higher cost of living area. So it is allowing them to have more money to help deal with that fact that the cost of living is higher for their staff and others. So once you have all of those weightings together, you then add it to your total adjusted, and then you multiply it by base state aid, which for the 24-25 school year is $5,378 per FTE. So you'll see, you just multiply it. Then there are some local foundation aid elements that get subtracted out of it, including certain grants they have, unencumbered funds the district has, special education state aid, and then if they've received any tuition from non-resident students, and then that determines the amount of total foundation aid, which is the portion that the state is then providing them. And then the last one I include is not part of state foundation aid, but is tied to it, which is, I'm sure most of you are aware of, heard of the local option budget. That is where districts are able to raise local mill levies to get supplemental money to go with it. I have that on there because that is tied to their total foundation aid. And so state law has it that districts are able to have up to the statewide average of the percent of it, or it is capped at 33%. So they would take a modified base amount, which is slightly higher than the base amount I talk about in here, multiply that by what their FTEs are, take 33% at max. The statewide average, I believe, is last year was just over 32%. And then that would tell them you can raise up to this amount of money locally. And so that would then determine a chunk of what their mill levy is. So that is the state foundation aid portion. Madam Chair, would you like me to pause for questions on this element before I go into the other parts?
Yes, please. Questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions. Well, one question is, and I should know this, but I just don't remember. So with, maybe you can answer, or the chair, with open enrollment, did that impact charging any out-of-district tuition?
I do not believe it did, because with open enrollment, I don't believe those students are able to be charged tuition. They're just able to apply for open seats in those districts. And so those districts would then get that student to count towards this formula, but they would not have any tuition, I believe, that they could be charged.
I'm just meaning that I don't see that there would be any tuition coming in from out-of-district students any longer with open enrollment. Maybe I didn't say that right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've not looked into that. I'd be happy to look into that. Or again, KSDE does have some representatives here who could maybe speak to that.
And then my second one was, it would be, to me anyway, it would be very helpful if we just did like student one and student two, and just took a student profile showing, okay, per pupil expenditure, and then added on some of these weightings, so you actually see how it, I mean, you put in a formula here, but those kinds of pictorial type things help me a lot, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback.
Other questions? Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. The local foundation aid includes unencumbered district funds. So when you subtract that out, does that include the total balance at the time, or is that how much has been put into the unencumbered funds balance for that year?
I believe, well, let me double check my memo real fast and see if that addresses. So it specifically is the unencumbered balance of a district's general fund. So at the end of the year, that is determined. So I believe that is it, but I don't think it would be do not believe it would be any other unencumbered balances from special funds.
Okay, that's why I wanted to check, because that would almost seem like districts that have been able to build up those unencumbered funds would almost get punished if they built it up too high. So that's why I asked the question. I want to make sure. Thank you.
Committee, other questions? Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wilson, maybe you'll get to this later on, but as it pertains to the supplemental general fund, the LOB, could you, for our benefit, talk to us about what school districts are authorized to levy, kind of their range that they're authorized to levy for the LOB?
Mm-hmm. So districts are required to at least levy 15%. So whatever their total state, well, not total foundation aid, but whatever their weighted FTE is times the modified base aid. And the reason that is different is the inflation escalator that we have in base aid began a year or two earlier with the LOB calculation. So it is kind of growing at slightly, it started growing slightly earlier. And so they determine what that number, basically depending on what percentage they want to levy as LOB, then they are taking that and saying, okay, we want 20%, that, let's say that is $3 million, and then they're going to just back into it and say, okay, if we have an assessed evaluation of X, how many mills do we need to raise to hit that 3 million? But then the state law caps it at 33%. So again, last year, I think the average was 32, so here soon districts will run into not being able to increase it, so it will just grow with valuation increases, as well, with state aid increases as far as the growth in that element.
Yeah, thank you. And this might need to come from KSDE, but to my knowledge, historically, there was not a single school district in Kansas that did not levy at least the state average of, I think historic 31% is the number I have in my mind is what it used to be. But then there was a number of districts that passed resolutions to give themselves the authority to collect the 33%. Would it, so that might be nice to verify how many districts, if there's any that deviate from that or less than that, might be a nice research question to answer.
Yeah, and I can absolutely get to the committee on what each district has for the percentage that they're authorizing.
And then one other question, of course, we were talking about property taxes and property tax reform is, I don't believe assessed valuation per pupil is a metric that's used for state foundation aid, but it is used to determine state aid, supplemental state aid to the LOB. Is that correct?
Yes, so I'll get to it and touch on it a bit here, but the assessed valuation per pupil is used for equalization aid, for supplemental state aid, as well as capital outlay state aid.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, any other questions? I just have a quick one. So step 3J kind of jogged my memory when you're talking about cost of living. I know that those are all from local property taxes, but the legislature built in a CPIU based on a 3-year average, and that, I believe, Matthew, went into effect for the 2024 school year.
So let's see, I need to double check. I know for what we have here on how cost of living weighting is, it is all about, or it is primarily driven by taking the statewide appraised value, the statewide average appraised value of a single family home, multiplying it by 1.25, and then you take the district's average appraised value of a home, subtract that earlier number that you got of that statewide times 100 or 1.25, and then you would divide B by A, and that gets C, which you then have a multiplier for. And so again, it's all laid out in the memo, but yes, a lot of it is built around kind of that difference of the average value of a single family home in the district versus the state.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, that just jogged my memory, not about specifically for the property tax, the local property tax, or the cost of living weighting for a specific area, but the legislature passed a CPI built in based on the 3-year inflation rate.
Yes, for base aid growth. Sorry, I was misinterpreting.
No, I'm sorry, I think I muddied the water with that, but I know that went into effect, and I believe, so we've now had 2 years of that.
Yes, so if you have my memo to reference on page 4 of the document, you will see for a lot of the first few years, it's just kind of really steady increases, and then you will notice like 24, 25, kind of a larger jump than in some of the other years, and then again another sizable jump in what we have estimated for next year. And so yes, I cannot remember if it was the 23-24 or this 24-25 that was the first with the CPIU, but it is in effect, and it has led to kind of some higher year over year since we had those few years of really escalated inflation.
So if the numbers that I've seen are correct, help me if they're not. So for the last 23, 24, 24, 25, so 2 years, right? That's been an increase of $417 million total for those 2 years. Do you know if that's accurate?
I'd have to double check, and I can make sure and either get it to the committee today or make sure Jennifer follows up tomorrow in her budget presentation to kind of note that.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Shane.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. For clarification on the cost of living tax, you could simply say that for all school districts, the districts whose median home value falls in the upper 25% would be able to levy the cost of living tax. So they're effectively they fall in the upper 25% of as far as median home value. Would that be
Yeah, so I
the
believe.
effect of the?
Yeah, with the way the formula is unless your median single-family home value is in excess of 125% of the state average, then you're not, then the calculation would not work out to give you a
325.
weighting.
All right, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, please proceed.
Perfect. So next I will kind of draw your attention to the flow chart I have that kind of tries to break into buckets of school district revenues. So kind of sticking from here, it'll kind of start turning into a local state kind of combo with what I'm going to touch on. So as Senator Shane mentioned earlier, so with the local option budget that the school districts levy, the state also provides supplemental state aid. Often the term local option budget and supplemental budget are kind of both used, or they mean the same thing. So what the state does for equalization aid in order to not penalize community or districts that might be in less affluent areas is depending on there's a formula that depending upon your average valuation per pupil, the state will provide you aid to offset your property taxes. So that I'll just get there real fast and flip back to that. So essentially your LOB is set at X, but instead of needing to raise all of that with local taxes, the state will give you a portion of that in supplemental state aid based upon the formula, and so the district does not need to raise as much locally because, again, an area that has a lower valuation, they would have to have a higher mill levy, and so it could be more of a burden upon that community in order to try and generate the same amount of money as somewhere that has a much higher valuation per pupil. And again, since it is based on assessed valuation, KSDE has on Data Central, and I'm happy to send it out to the committee if you would like, a assessed valuation report that notes it, and you will see that it is not always the urban areas that are higher. For instance, the district with the highest assessed valuation per pupil is Burlington with Wolf Creek there. And so versus the one with the lowest being Fort Leavenworth, because they are not able to generate many property taxes on base. And then following that is Elkhart. And so there's a variety of different reasons that would impact that. So that's where districts are going to raise some of their own, and depending on where they hit, the state will kind of backfill to help equalize that. Similarly, capital outlay, state law allows school districts to levy up to 8 mills locally. That then goes in their capital outlay fund to be spent on various expenditures such as computer software, performance uniforms, architectural expenses, building sites, school buses, other fixed assets. Once again, similarly to supplemental, the districts that have lower assessed valuations per pupil will get state aid to help equalize that out, so they do not necessarily have to raise it all on their own either, because 8 mills in a district that has a lot less assessed valuation does not grow. And I was wrong on that equalization. I don't believe it backfills, it adds to it to supplement the fact that if you don't have a lot of assessed valuation, 8 mills is not going to generate nearly as much as in a district that has a high assessed valuation. So, and then the final one that has that kind of equalization formula is capital improvement. This is bond and interest. So when school districts pass bonds, again, depending upon a formula that's laid out in the memo, and I'm more than happy to go into detail with, districts can receive a portion of state aid to help with those bond payments, depending upon where they fall. This was redone a few years ago by the legislature, to essentially remove Fort Leavenworth because it was always based upon the lowest valuation district, and then you subtract from there. And Fort Leavenworth being an outlier, being fully encompassed in the base, was really never changing, and so just kind of limiting the districts that could as they continued to outpace it. So you will find that in there. So I believe that it is 51% is what it begins at, starting with, in this case, Elkhart, and then as you continue to go up, that percentage will decrease, I think, per $1,000, if I remember right. So again, the districts on the upper end are going to receive nothing, and then a lot of districts will receive a portion. And then the final two elements of state revenue that I will touch on is, one is KPERS employer contributions. So the state of Kansas provides the employer contribution for KPERS for both school districts, but also what is called non-USDs, so community college employees, as well as like the interlocals we spoke about yesterday for special education and things like that. The state provides the money to those organizations who then pay it to KPERS as their employer match. And then lastly, on the specific ones I'll call out, the state does provide a little bit of lunch food assistance to districts. I believe for about the last 10 years, 15 I've looked, it's been about $2.5 million, right? To about $2.5 million per year. And by state law is capped at being about 6 cents per eligible lunch. And it normally weighs out at about 4 to 5 cents a year this past decade. So that is state. Local revenue, we've touched on pretty much all of them. I will note there is an adult education mill levy that a district can raise to help with some of those adult education programs, funding them. And then districts will also have things such as school meal sales to help fund their food service, as well as a lot of them might have fees such as textbook rental fees that will then go into special accounts to help pay when they need to replace textbooks, things of that nature. And then you will also notice the final chunk is federal. I'm not going to get a lot into that. I know Jennifer tomorrow will have a sheet that breaks out a lot of revenues that will contain some of the federal as well, so you can see things, but that is another portion that either is getting distributed to districts through KSDE, or some districts are getting directly, depending on the size of the district. So the final thing that I will touch on funding as well is virtual students. I'd missed that because it is a little different too. So if you were looking at Legal Max, which is the document that KSDE puts out that kind of shows all of the math that is done into this, you will see virtual students are handled a little bit differently by the state, less so than it was a few years ago, as there have been some changes made. But for each school district in the state is authorized to have a virtual school. And so for virtual school students who are 19 years and under and enrolled like you would in a brick and mortar, just at the virtual school, the district is going to determine what those FTE amounts are, provide that, and then they are getting $5,600 per FTE. Just a flat cap, there's not weightings, anything like that. And then the virtual schools as well receive payments per credit hour for the virtual school services provided to individuals who are 19 years or younger but have dropped out of school, or for adult learners. And so you will see, I believe both of those are the same in being $709 per credit hour that is then provided for those programs as well. And so for that, I'll be happy to stand for further questions as the committee has.
Committee, what questions do you have for Mr. Willis? Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It just might be helpful as well, and maybe this will be a future presentation for us to better understand which particular funds can carry forward unencumbered cash balances and which cannot, and the constraints put around that, because I know that's a common topic of conversation on the total unencumbered cash balances that exist in public schools. So just getting a better grasp on which ones can have them, potentially why you would carry forward an unencumbered cash balance might be nice to kind of pair with the revenue side as well.
Absolutely.
What other questions or requests? So, Mr. Willis, tomorrow, will we get information on, well, I'll ask a question. Is there a student, any student in the state who's just a 1.0 FTE?
Based on the amount, no. In this, you mean as, let me clarify, as far as a student who would not qualify for any weightings?
Correct. Is there a student that doesn't have any weightings attached, they're just a 1.0?
I would defer to KSDE for sure, but my guess is probably not, given I believe most, if not all districts, get either high or low enrollment. So
Yeah.
you would at least have that is going on it.
So do we have, I was going to pull this up because I know it's available on KSDE, but what is the difference between head count and FTE? Do we, or are we going to get that tomorrow? I don't want to jump ahead.
I am more than happy to go over it. So head count is bodies in seats. So for instance, there are, I believe, 13 of you on the committee, 11. So head count would be like each of you in a seat right now would be the head count for this, say, the School of Oz. But then let's say each of you is only in here for half the day, then each of you would count as a half FTE because you were only equivalent to half of a full-time student for this case. So the difference is based on whether that seat is filled with a person versus how long they fill that seat.
Okay, but do we know numbers-wise? Like, what is the head count for the state, and then what is
Versus the FTE?
Yes.
I can make sure and get that, because yes,
as numbers.
I have both of those. I do not have them on me, though, so.
Okay. So committee tomorrow, we're going to get actually into the numbers, but this was just an opportunity to kind of introduce you to how the formula works. I know you guys all understand it perfectly, and we'll have a test on it tomorrow to see if you can actually calculate.
I will also
Yes.
note one last thing. On the, it's hyperlinked on the digital document, but there is a website here on the bottom of the flow chart that takes you to the budget page on KSDE, where they upload all of the budgets for each district, as well as they have some really great budget at a glance and other kind of summarized ones. So if a specific district, if you're wanting to see its revenue breakdowns or really get into the weeds with its full budget of kind of where everything is, that is all online and easily accessible, and that is the link on the flow chart. So,
Committee, any final questions? I will, also, I failed to give you guys a heads up. We will be meeting Monday in this committee. So plan on being here Monday at 1:30 for a committee meeting. Seeing no other questions or